Hey everybody, it's Romania Black. We are on episode 1 of season 3 of Bungo Stray Dogs. I can't believe we're here already. I know I've been watching this series for a while now, but it seems so strange that we're already to season 3. I'm really excited, but I'm also kind of sad because we don't have a season 4 confirmed yet. So this is the last season of Bungo Stray Dogs. And obviously there's Bungo Stray Dogs 1, there's the manga. I kind of want to talk about that as we get closer to the end of this season. I haven't fully decided exactly what I want to do, so I'll probably be polling people on Patreon as it gets closer to the end of the season. But I'm really excited to be starting this season because season 2 was amazing. I loved season 2. I liked season 1 a lot. Don't get me wrong, but season 2 elevated things so wonderfully. And I know I kept saying it was a shonen, and some of you have been like, it's a seinen. And I'm like, okay, fine, it's a seinen. But it's been so good, this series as a whole, regardless of genre. And so I'm really, really excited to get in to season 3. And this episode is called Dazai and Chuya 15 years old. Which means we're getting a flashback, just like Dark Age. Okay, sure. So I just watched Dead Apple a few days ago. I watched Dead Apple a few days ago. And so we have Fyodor set up as our main bad guy for this season. I'm totally not convinced that Fitzgerald's dead though, and I know the guild is not totally out of the picture. Lovecraft might be because he's went back to his home, but I just can't get, and Twain might be out of the picture because he said he was going to go back and write his memoir or his autobiography, but Louisa said she was going to go look for Fitzgerald. Steinbeck said he was going to go take care of the guild, so I'm like, okay. So there's still players active in the guild that are probably going to still be there. We don't fully know about Q, what Q's doing, that's still up in the air. But the fact that this episode's called Dazai and Chuya 15 years old. So in the Dark Age arc, Dazai was 18 because he's 22 now. So this would have been 3 years prior to that. So this might have been around the time of Dead Apple, the beginning of Dead Apple, when we have Oda. And we saw Oda and Chuya and Dazai together. So, but I think they were 16 because it was 6 years prior. So they were 16 in Dead Apple at the beginning. So this is a year before that. So this is a year before Dead Apple's events. So before the whole Dragon Head incident where Oda got the orphans. So is Oda going to be in this? I don't know. I'm really excited. But yeah, I'm all for a flashback. And if it's Dazai and Chuya, I mean, Dead Apple pretty much cemented that, like, okay. Fine pairing. Sure thing. So that's exciting. Don't tell me how long this flashback is. If it's 1 episode or more, don't spoil me. I was spoiled with the Dark Age because somebody, like, in the first comments, they were like, oh, this is a 4-episode flashback. And I was like, it's fine that y'all told me that, but then it kind of takes away a little bit of the tension because you're like, okay, well, I can count down 4 episodes now. So don't tell me how long this is. I don't want to know. I want to go in blind. But yeah, I'm pretty excited, y'all. Let's do this. Let's get into season 3 and see what we have in store, shall we? If we're going back to Dazai in the Port Mafia age, which he would have been at 15, because 8 years ago was when Mori took over. So this would have been a year into Mori taking over. So Mori's been the leader of the Port Mafia for a year now. So I'm all about Port Mafia Dazai and Mori dynamics. I love it. So I'm curious to see more. I want to see more. So let's do this, shall we? We are going to start this episode here in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's go. Oh, so this episode, oh buddy. Yeah, I kind of love that we're getting Dazai's experiences with the 2 people I ship him with. We have the Dark Age where we had Oda and introducing Oda. And I love the dynamic and the stark contrast already that we're setting from the Dark Age arc to this flashback with Chuya and Dazai. Because you have Dazai at 18 years old who clearly has some more maturity. A lot more maturity, actually. An exceedingly amount more maturity in 3 years. Which tells me, sadly, that 1, Dazai's been through a lot of shit in the last 3 years since the incidents that happened in this flashback. And him being in the Port Mafia, it's like hardened him and matured him and made him darker and grittier. Because even Dazai here, that it's so cool how this show does it. We have Dazai at age 22 and we see him in the cultivation and accumulation of all his experiences. Then we see him at age 18, and we see him like darker and more grittier and more angry and frustrated and just kind of ingrained in the Port Mafia way. And then we see him here at age 15, and in this scenario, he's still kind of innocent in a way. Like, he's a 15-year-old kid, so he's still innocent in a lot of ways, but you can tell that there's that inkling of the Port Mafia kind of starting to filter in through him. And Dazai, I like that Mori, we're going to talk about Mori and Dazai's relationship in this, because this is all I've wanted, is to get more with Dazai and Mori. I'm so happy already with this. But I like the established tone difference. The Dark Age Flashback was very classy, is very noir. It had a very Ango and Oda feel to it, where it was classy, subtle, subdued, noir, jazz music. It felt very Oda and Ango influenced, right? Whereas with Chuuya in this flashback, it's two 15-year-old boys fighting and arguing with each other. So there's like more rock music, it's more like upbeat and dark comedy. Like, the tone is very different, and I like that, because the one thing I was afraid of going into this episode, when I saw the title of it, I was like, okay, we're doing another flashback. My fear was that it was going to be the same. It was going to feel too similar. It does not. It feels totally different. It is a totally different vibe, which I am all for, because Dazai's relationship with Chuuya is very different than his relationship with Oda, right? So I really, really appreciate that. But oh my gosh, there's so many cool things being set up here. It's kind of, you need to map out the timeline, because that makes it crazy. Because when you think about it, like, we have the present timeline of Dazai at age 22. Then we have 4 years back with the Dark Age arc when Oda died. Then if you go 2 years back, it's the events of Dead Apple. So the events of Dead Apple at the beginning there, with, God, Fyodor coming in with the man that can control the abilities. I forget his name. It's like Tatsuhiko. I've forgotten his name already. That's not a good sign. But anyway, you have the Dead Apple events. And then we're going back a year prior to that, which 8 years back was when, 8 years back, or around 8 years back, was when the previous boss supposedly died. And this, I don't know if this has been an entire year has passed. It says 7 years earlier. So it seems like it's not too far from when the events of the previous boss dying happened. So maybe it's been a year in between. Maybe it's been 8 or 9 months. Whatever the case may be, it's around that same amount of time. Before the events of the beginning of Dead Apple, but after the events of when the previous boss supposedly died. So that's interesting. Getting the timeline straight is, I love that Bungo Stray Dogs has this complicated timeline of flashbacks and everything. I really like that. I think that's really, really cool. But, so we have the Dragon Head conflict, and this is all leading up to it, which is interesting, which it's suspected maybe Fyodor is involved in the Dragon Head conflict, perhaps, so that might all tie together. I don't know, this opening plane scene, I got very Spider-Man vibes, like the Amazing Spider-Man 2 movie. I got vibes from that. But I don't know why this guy is by himself on a plane, unless the idea was to lure out Chuuya and then try to kill him. But that backfired hilariously for him. I love Chuuya's gravity powers of, how did he get up on the plane? Don't know, don't care. He can control gravity. He can just hop up that elevation and go onto the plane. No big deal. It's fine. I guess he's kind of like a magnet. He can just magnetize himself through gravity to the plane itself. I love that I just love Chuuya's power. It's so freaking cool. The idea that he can kick the bullet back to kill the guy. The fact that as the stuff is all flying around the plane, he can use gravity to keep himself from being sucked out of the plane. It's really freaking cool. And then the idea that he's going to kill everyone in the Port Mafia. Because obviously, at first I was like, it's funny because he ends up joining the Port Mafia, and he seems pretty invested in the Port Mafia in the current timeline. So I'm like, a lot's changed in 7 years. But, of course, seeing him getting paired up with Dazai, it's like Dazai clearly had an influence on that. Mori had an influence on that. And it's clear that the previous boss is the reason why Chuuya doesn't like the Port Mafia, because Hirotsu established that the previous boss, was well known for just being extremely violent without any reason. He'd just tell people to kill groups of others without really having a long-term plan. And so that's what Hirotsu was not happy with. He's like, well, if you hadn't stepped in Mori and killed him, we would have probably collapsed eventually anyway, because he just got irrational. So interesting. I am so fascinated by the relationship of Dazai and Mori because they are very, very similar characters. And this opening scene of them in the doctor's office is so cool. I love it. It's so telling. And we have that stupid cat. That stupid cat from season 2 is following Dazai around. Don't spoil me, but I find it interesting that that cat is just kind of meandering about. So we have boarded up, it looks like the doctor's office where Mori has been working. And everything's boxed up, and there's like a microwave and an old computer, and our men are going to be fighting with kitchen knives at this rate because they can't get the stuff through to get all their... So I like seeing the Port Mafia in kind of shambles at this stage of the game because that makes sense and is realistic. Like right now, in the current timeline, the Port Mafia is thriving, right? But obviously when one boss dies and another takes over, there is kind of that transition period where of course you're going to have people that aren't happy with the transition and people that will think that Mori... And I like that they established that some people don't believe that Mori should be the next boss. Like a mere doctor shouldn't be the leader of the Port Mafia, which it's like, I don't think Mori's a mere doctor. But yeah, so I like seeing his office with everything boxed up. It kind of looks like it's in shambles. There's medical equipment everywhere. It's like he's in the process of moving into the new... So that's what makes me think that not too much time has passed since the old boss died. Not too much time has passed, but just enough where they've been in the process of moving. But I like that Mori has been working in his doctor's office even as the Port Mafia head. I like that he didn't instantly just grandurely just go in and throw his stuff everywhere. It's been a process. I like that kind of realism there. And Mori's still in his doctor's coat here. Like he's not fully integrated into the position yet. By the time Chuuya meets with him, he has. But he's like in the transitionary period. We're losing contracts for our protection business. So I like that Mori's like just trying to be like, maybe we aren't cut out for this. I find Mori and Dazai so similar, and in this scene where it's just the two of them, you really see that their humor and their personalities kind of bounce off of each other in really interesting ways. And when Mori says he sees himself in Dazai, you get that because their attitudes are very similar. And he's just like, what do you think, Dazai-kun? And he's like, oh, come on, Mori, not having money, not having intel, not having trust in your subordinates. You knew that from the beginning. So I like that Dazai's like, you knew what you were getting into. You knew in this transition that we weren't going to have all the intel. Not all the information would instantly get transcribed over. There was going to be a lack of trust from some of the subordinates, a third, as we find out, and that we weren't going to have money flowing like we normally do whenever there's a transition period. He's like, you knew that from the start. And I didn't put two and two together, but it makes so much sense that Dazai, the worst place for him to be as a suicidal kid, is in a doctor's office with all these drugs and everything, that he's mixing hypertension and hypotension medicine together, thinking that it's going to work. And I just, that expression where he's just like, meh. And then Mori's saying, you are so mean, paralleling what he tells Elise Chan, you're so mean. So again, we've established in Dead Apple that Elise Chan is part of Mori's power. So him saying you're so mean is a reflection of his own views. So Dazai is saying that he sees himself in Dazai. It's so cool. I love it. I love it so much. Their conversation, and he's like, why are you mixing those medicines together? And it's kind of sad that even at 15 years old, Dazai is just done with life and he doesn't see the point of it. And so he's trying to kill himself. That's the sad part. And I know the show plays suicide as like a black comedy, as like a dark joke, but it's really sad that Dazai's 15. Like, you have your whole life ahead of you, and at this point, he doesn't see the point of living. It's like, And Mori's like, look, you can't kill yourself off yet because you were there when I inherited the boss's seat. You're a witness. You need to stay alive to help me. So don't just be drinking that and dying. And it's clear that he gave Dazai the coat and the little suit and everything. Like, that's all. And it kind of makes sense that the suit and tie might be something he'd wear for a doctor's office. Like, it's kind of like a doctor's uniform, sort of. So it makes sense he gave Dazai that clothing when he took him in. I have a feeling that Mori took Dazai in. It's, their relationship. It's a weird father-son dynamic, right? Mori and Dazai have a very weird father-son dynamic where Mori's kind of grooming Dazai to take over from him later on. And you can kind of get that in this episode. Even if in the Dark Age arc, Mori's like, I'm afraid Dazai will kill me one day and take over. Yeah, I'm sure he has that fear. But at the same time, Mori is totally grooming Dazai to take over the Port Mafia. Like, from this episode, you can tell that. Where he's giving Dazai strategies. He's saying, hey, you need to think about this. If you're a leader, here's the things you need to think about. We need to work together with these people to benefit the Port Mafia. Here's the strategy we need to be using. And so on and so forth. So he's teaching Dazai these things that he's learned along the way to kind of groom him to take over. And it's so fascinating. And then even in season 2, when we have the flashback where he's talking to Hirotsu and he's lamenting the fact that Dazai isn't his right-hand man anymore, because he's like, I need Dazai for the Port Mafia to be complete. And so you can just tell in this flashback that Mori's like, okay, you're a 15-year-old kid. You got a long way to go. But one day, it's kind of like the Lion King. It's like everything the darkness touches is our kingdom. One day, this will all be yours. Like, it has a very like Mufasa Simba vibe between Mori and Dazai in the weirdest ways. And so Dazai says he made an error in judgment, saying it was smart of you to choose someone who attempts suicide as your accomplice, because he's like, Dazai saying, I get why you chose me as your accomplice because I'm suicidal. So if something happens to me, everybody's just going to think it's a suicide and not think twice about it. But he's like, I'm still alive. It's a year later. So it has been a year. Okay. It has been a year. So the transition process is a little rockier than one would expect. But Mori's like, no, it's not an error. He's like, no. He's like, you and I were successful in our mission together. Like, I like how he frames it like, we're accomplices. We did this together. There was no I, there was we. So Mori phrases his words very carefully, which I like. And saying the mission, and Dazai's like, the mission isn't complete until those who are involved are in the assassination are silenced, which would include him. And he's like, to that end, I was a perfect accomplice. And then, yeah, he says, if I ended my life in a suicide after you became boss thanks to my testimony, no one would suspect a thing. And in that moment when Mori's looking at him, he does look a lot like Fyodor. A lot. Which I find intriguing. But Mori, you can tell Mori's looking at Dazai as he says this, like, you're a smart cookie, but you don't know everything. And then I like Mori's like, you remind me of someone, which is him. He's like, I would thought the same thing. And Mori's like, if I was going to silence you, I would have done so a long time ago. He's like, if you want, I can prepare you something that ends your life comfortably. And Dazai, it's so sad. He's like, really? And that's what Mori uses as an exchange. That's what he uses to get him to go investigate Chuuya. He's like, I'll make you a drug that'll kill you comfortably, Snow White. Speaking of Dead Apple, I'll make you a drug, Snow White, that'll kill you comfortably if you go investigate this kid in this city for me, the king of the sheep. And he's a 15-year-old kid at this time, so of course that motivates Dazai. And he's like, sure, this sounds sketchy, but okay, I'll go do your minuscule task for you. And so Mori's like, there's a rumor going around that a certain individual has emerged from that area, and I want you to investigate the rumor. So I guess the rumor is about the Black Flame and about the previous boss rather than Chuuya necessarily, but Chuuya's there. And then we have the Silver Oracle that's going to grant him passage. I love it. And so, yeah, we get the explanation of it, so Dazai knows what it is. And so when Oda gets it later on, there's that connection. And so the really sad thing is that at the end there at the door, he says, who did I remind you of? And I love that where Mori's like, me. And Dazai just kind of stares at him. And then Mori asks Dazai, why do you wish to die? Let me ask you. And Dazai's like, do you really think there's any value in the act of living? That's such a cruel line, and it's so sad. It's like, you're 15 years old, Dazai. Yeah, there's value in the act of living. And here's the thing, too. Mori is big brain. Mori is long game strategist. So when he saw Chuuya and Dazai together and realized they were hitting it off, he's like, I need this kid in the Port Mafia. Not only because of his ability, because at this point I don't think Mori knows about corruption, because Dazai doesn't either. So Mori's just like, this kid's got a good ability. He'd be very helpful in the Port Mafia. But I think Mori realizes, above all else, is there value in the act of living? Mori's probably like, yes. And Chuuya could be one of those things that is a value to you and a reason to live. Like having friendship and having someone to confide in and to fight for is a reason for living. And Dazai gets that with Oda, but I think he also can get it with Chuuya. And that's why Mori's like, you need to stay because this kid's a suicidal brat. And if I'm going to keep him around for a long time, he needs a reason to get up in the morning. And that could be you. So basically, Mori is a giant Chuuya Dazai shipper, which I'm all for. But yeah, so I hate that line. Do you think there's a value in the act of living? It's like, Dazai, come on. I honestly thought this giant crater at the beginning here, also, it's right next to the tower that we saw in Dead Apple. What the heck? What the heck, y'all? What the heck? So interesting, the coincidences here. I'm glad y'all had me watch Dead Apple before this because it makes a lot more sense now. And as per usual, Dazai is just reading the book and just following along and trying to list off suicidal things. And Hirotsu, I guess it's Hirotsu, maybe it's not Hirotsu. And the cat's there. The damn calico cat is there as well. Don't spoil me about the cat, but I'm so intrigued. I'm so intrigued. Interesting. But yeah, so I initially, when we saw the crater, thought that it was caused by Chuuya. That Chuuya made the crater using his gravity powers, like using corruption, but that's not the case. So interesting. And so we have Hirotsu following, but I guess that's not Hirotsu, or Hirotsu gets possessed by the flame at some point. It seems like the flame is associated with that area, but then we see somebody posing as the old boss in the vault, so clearly it can move around. So I am very curious if we'll get more on the flame and if it possessed Hirotsu, or if that was even Hirotsu from the start, if it had always been the previous boss and the ghost of him. That's the one part I'm confused about, and I'm guessing we'll probably get an explanation in future episodes. But I love that if this is Hirotsu, that them having to just basically, Hirotsu just has to deal with Dazai's antics all the time, and he just gets used to it over time, and he's like, okay. Because he says we shouldn't underestimate this kid. He witnessed the old boss's murder. So I guess it is Hirotsu, and he was just possessed by the black flame at some point because he got really angry at Chuuya. I guess we'll get more information about that in the next episode or two or whatever. But I like that an army comprised entirely of juveniles, the sheep, and then Chuuya is their leader. So of course, Chuuya would have a beef with the Port Mafia if they're trying to like stop all these kids. And Chuuya, we've established from season 2, Chuuya is very compassionate. He's tsundere to a fault. Like Chuuya has a lot of compassion in his heart, and he cares for Dazai, he cares for others, but he hides it behind this tough, childish exterior where he's all talk. But he really does care. And so obviously he doesn't want his members of his group hurt. So when Mori threatens him with some of them being held hostage, he's like, fine, I'll go along with what you want because I don't want them getting injured. Very interesting. And then saying it's Mori senpai. I love Miyano saying Moshi Moshi. It's so good. And then of course, Dazai saying, I found the previous boss. He came back and trying to lure him out from the pits of hell. So maybe he knew at the time that Hirotsu was possessed. Maybe he knew Hirotsu was possessed at that time. I'm not sure. Dazai's big brain too, like Mori, so who knows. But what an entrance. Oh my gosh. The last time we saw Chuuya and Dazai, Chuuya was passed out in Dazai's lap. And here we have Chuuya standing over him. I freaking love the design of teenage Chuuya with the moto jacket with his arms in it the whole time. I love it. He doesn't have the stupid hat, as Dazai would call it. But, oh man, and Dazai's head like constantly getting injured where that band-aid is. What are you, just a suicidal brat? Oh, and he's like, you're a brat too. I love it. And I love that they instantly dislike each other. It's like the perfect, they instantly have chemistry. And they're both looking after the Arahabaki, the same thing. And Dazai's like, oh, so that's what it's called. Cool. So I love that they're connected from the start. and that Chuuya just gives off this like stray dog from the street, and he's just so crass with Dazai. And that shot of Dazai with his head turned is so good. Like, the animation studio, Bones, y'all just love animating Dazai. You love making him look as gorgeous as possible, even like as a 15-year-old kid. And I like that Chuuya does not like being called king of the sheep. He's like, I'm not a king. He's like, I hate it. I just happen to have a card up my sleeve, which is probably corruption. And they don't know. And Dazai's like, you're a cocky, overconfident child, the person I hate the most. Because that makes sense. Dazai likes people that are calculating and smart and intelligent, that he can kind of, that's why him and Mori get along so well, or did get along so well. Whereas Chuuya comes across as like just super overconfident and cocky, and Dazai's like, no. And I like that even 8 years later, these two characters haven't changed that much. They've matured, obviously, and grown up, but they've not totally changed. Like, the hints of their younger attitudes are all still there. And then I like that Dazai tries to tell Hirotsu what his power is. Because Hirotsu's power is the ability to push back, right? To push back and use force and force something back, which on the surface seems like it'd be a good counter to a gravity power. But in this fight, Hirotsu's kind of got a more purple glow around him. And I thought in season 1, Hirotsu's ability was kind of pinkish. It was kind of like the camellia. It was pinkish. So maybe Dazai's known for a while that the black flame has been inhabiting him, or that something else has possessed him. Interesting. And here's the thing. Dazai says that he kicks him. I want to watch this again, because he says he kicks him to get away. And we don't see it because Hirotsu looks up. But I don't know. It almost seemed like Dazai intentionally got pushed back so that he could see Hirotsu using his ability. I don't know. But then we see, the previous boss returning for a brief second. And then we don't know what happens. I keep thinking they're going to go back and show us more from that flashback, but I don't know. I'm fascinated by this guy that is one of the executives that says he's not long for this world. Like, I'm so fascinated. Because he's using his power to freeze Chuuya in place. Like, Chuuya can't touch anything. He can't put his feet on the ground, touching anything, and he can't use his hands. And so he's always covered up and bundled up. He's such an interesting looking character. And then Dazai comes in, all bandaged up, of course. Dazai seems to get injuries in the same location, which is kind of funny in a way. He's like, yeah. I like that instantly Dazai and him, they just chide each other. It's great. So, and then Mori's like, you guys just hit it off, even after knowing each other for one day. And Dazai's like, excuse me? So, the one guy says, I'm embarrassed to admit that I'm freezing and could die at any minute. So I wonder if his ability, he says I could die at any minute. Was it Rakudo? And then he's like, how could he be cold at this time of year? And he says, believe it or not, he's a secondary executive and an excellent ability user. I think his name was Rakudo. But interesting. What did he say here? I want to go back and see what Mori said, asking him. I want to get his name right. But I wonder if his ability is one that, Rando, that's his name, not Rakudo, Rando. So I wonder if Rando, if his ability in freezing things is also like killing him. Like if that freezing thing is like affecting his own body. That's interesting. I'm curious about him because if this whole thing, like next episode is called God of Fire, and we have the idea of fire, and this guy's freezing and cold. I mean, there's a contrast there. So I wonder if he's going to have more influence in this arc, in this flashback, because it would be interesting. I feel like you're not going to introduce an executive for no reason. So I wonder if this executive Rando is going to have some impact in this flashback and then die, and that's why we don't see him in the present, because the whole fire and ice thing, it's too coincidental to not do anything with, right? And then of course, I like that Chuuya just creates this giant crater in Mori's office, and Mori doesn't even blink an eye. He's like, yep, cool, figured you'd do that. Thanks. Because we've established that they don't have a lot of money, and so Mori's probably like, well, damn it, I'm not going to get that fixed for a while. And then Chuuya's saying, don't tell me you've forgotten what you've done to this city. And Mori quickly says, our previous boss's rampage. The tyranny of that man who led the city into a state of violence and terror is still fresh in everyone's mind. So he's establishing, he's like, this is what the previous boss did, but that guy's dead. I'm the new boss, and that's not going to happen. And we've established in the present timeline that Mori does care about the city. So I think that that's one of the reasons why Chuuya ends up going with Mori, I'm sure, is because Mori's probably going to tell him, like, look, I care about the city like you do. That's why I killed the previous boss, so I could take over and do some good. So that's interesting. And then he just admits it right off the bat. He's like, yeah, he didn't die of illness. I killed him. So he clearly trusts Chuuya. And he trusts that Chuuya's not going to blab that knowledge because he has the hostage. And I like the Dazai's like, why are you telling him everything? We just established we can't tell everybody that I killed him. And Mori's big brain, so he's like, it's fine if I tell him because he's going to join us anyway. He's not going to blab this. I love it. I love it. I love that he takes a little quill from his doctor's office and puts it in his office. I like subtle details like that when shows include little tiny animation details. Like he took the little quill and ink from his doctor's office and that's in his new office. I really like that. Just little subtle things. But so Mori is also, one thing that's interesting about Mori is that Mori is also always thinking of the long game, like the big picture. So he's like, I'm not going to hurt this kid. He's like, we can achieve our goals without violence. He's like, we both just want shared information. You and I want the same thing, Chuuya. And if we work together, we can get that. And of course, Mori's thinking that this kid, Chuuya, working with us is going to benefit the Port Mafia in the long run. But he's also probably thinking, like, this is a recruitment strategy. I'm going to send him with Dazai to go get this done. And then we're going to recruit this kid to the Port Mafia to keep doing good for the city. So I'm going to be interested to know how that works out. But I love Mori's, like, taking on the Port Mafia leader look from his doctor's uniform. I love it. And he says, you guys are just children, but as a fellow leader, I feel for you. Because he's like, I know how you feel, Chuuya, because you're a leader. You understand what's at stake. And when you lead a group, what you have to do as a leader. So he's trying to relate to him. And then he's also using this entire conversation as a lesson for Dazai. The wielder of the greatest violence in the room is Chuuya-kun. But as you can see, violence is just one tool the Port Mafia can use. We can use many other rooms, and our whole nature is to control rational action through any means. So it's just a big lesson for Dazai, and Dazai's like, this whole conversation is just a lecture for me. And Mori's like, I don't know. Yes. Oh my gosh. So I'm very curious to know about the previous leader and why he's returned, what this whole thing with the god of fire, the black flames is. And I like that Chuuya's like, well, do you believe in different gods? If Dead Apple in season 2 has taught us anything, this world has its own spiritual structure that's very, I mean, you have Lovecraft, who is not human. He's otherworldly. So as soon as Lovecraft was revealed to not be an ability user or even human, I was like, well, you've just thrown everything out the window. Because if something like Lovecraft can exist, then sure, this world can have different gods. Why not? I mean, and then we had Dead Apple, where people came back from the dead. So yeah, if we're establishing that people coming back from the dead is a thing that can happen, why not? Why can't the previous boss come back? Or whatever the case may be. And that kind of sheds some light on the whole thing with Fitzgerald and why he wants to bring his daughter back, because it's been established people can come back from the dead. It doesn't usually go well, but they can. So Fitzgerald's pipe dream of bringing his daughter back isn't exactly a pipe dream. There's a little bit of levity to it, which is kind of crazy. I also wanted to talk about, I didn't get a chance to mention this in Dead Apple, but Fyodor talks about the book being a blank slate, and I was like, is this like Death Note? I haven't watched Death Note, but I do know that the whole premise is that the main protagonist gets a book that if you write their name in it, the character dies. That's all I know about Death Note. But, so that makes me think, is this book that Fyodor's after, if you write something in the book, does it come true? Is it kind of like Kunikita's power in a way, where you can write something and it happens and becomes reality? I don't know. That's very interesting. But I feel like this supernatural thing with Arahabaki is not too far-fetched given what we've seen from Dead Apple and what we've seen with Lovecraft. So I'm very curious to see what we're going to end up getting with that as far as the rest of the series goes. And then, of course, I love how just childish... It's a nice reminder that Dazai and Chuya are still 15. They're voice actors like Miyano, and the voice actor for Chuya, he also voices Jean on Attack on Titan. They make their voices sound younger, which is really cool, especially Miyano. He sounds very childish here. He's like, I don't want to do this by myself. And Mori's like, you're not going to be by yourself. You're going to work with Chuya. And then I love the animation of Dazai just skipping on the ledge, like just skipping down. Like, that's such a childish, cute thing to do. And it's just, I like that the animation just reminds us that these are 15-year-old kids. And they're being tasked with this big, giant mission. And then they're arguing back and forth and being like, you're smaller than me. Nah, nah, nah. And then Mori's like, you should drink more milk. None of your business, you bastard. I'm 15. I'm still growing. And then Mori's like, okay, quiet, both of you. And just shuts it down like that. I love it. I love that Mori just has that power. He's like, okay, stop. Collaborate and listen. I'm all for it. He's like, neither of you can do anything, so... And these two just jumping around like kids, like little grasshoppers. I love it. And of course, they go to interrogate. They go to the place they're going to interrogate, and it's already been blown up. They didn't get there in time because they were just gallivanting around. And then this guy shows up to get him from behind. And Chuya, I just love Chuya just giving this big epic spiel like, I'm going to beat the snot out of you. And who do you think you are? And Dazai's just sitting there like, God, I hate you. I love it. But God of Fire. Okay. Cool beans. Cool beans. We didn't get an OP or an ED. Well, we kind of got an ED. We got an ED this episode, but I want to see it in full. But we didn't really get an OP. So I'm curious. We didn't do that with season 2, episode 1 either. So I'm curious if we'll get, if this is a flashback arc, if we get an OP that's specific for it or not. I don't know. I'll be curious to see that. But don't spoil me. But I really enjoyed this episode. I've wanted, since Chuya and Dazai were introduced as being partners, I've wanted to see them in the past. And I like that we're getting them first meeting and their first mission together. And just seeing their personalities right off the bat conflict like they do. It's very, very cool. So I'm excited, y'all, to dive into this 3rd season. This was a good start. I'm curious to know your thoughts below on this episode. Please no spoilers, or tag spoilers if you want to, but I'm excited to know what y'all think. So I hope you enjoyed this reaction. But yeah, next week we'll get into episode 2 of season 3. In the meantime, I hope y'all have a wonderful week. Please stay safe, take care, and I'll be back soon with more Bungo Stray Dogs. Bye.